There was the story of an I and or a me that was born into reality. Then there was a collapse of I and or me. The embodiment can go through up to 2 of these after 8 hours of exertion. At the job where I wear these green shirts. That of course is Asta. Yep, good old Asta. Tell you what, it wasn't for them, wouldn't be able to pay my bills, be able to live in this place, pay the rent. So if things seem bad at your job, just remember what it pays for when you get home. Oh, getting back to transcendence. Transcendence. Okay, there was the story of an I and or me that was born into reality. Well, let's elaborate on that. When I say let us elaborate, those one could say others who have also who have also collapsed their I and me, who were born into this reality, well, this apparent reality, as Dr. Thomas Campbell would say, virtual reality. And embodiment is equivalent to a term that Tom Campbell would use. That would be avatar. So there are many similarities to defining or recognizing all that is, and how all that is seemingly providing a reality or a reality base. And then there is participation in this reality, virtual or otherwise, whatever one may call reality. You may call reality virtual, you may call it the absolute reality, or you may even call it a matrix. Scientifically, using the double slit experiment as physicists would. You would need an observer. Well, not necessarily that an observer is necessary or needed, but however, this is how embodiment fits into that way of defining our association with reality. That by observing the apparent reality that is around you, that your brain or your mind or embodiment is translating as though there is the appearance of reality. So each I and or me will have their own, let's say have their own story. Each I and or me will always have their own story about the manner by which they were born into this reality. The manner by which an I and or me is born into reality is seemingly similar in the sense that there is a standard pattern or a standard method of going about integrating into the appearance of reality around the, or that surrounds the I and or me, or that reality which the I and or me is perceiving. So then there is the appearance of reality, and then there's also the perception of that reality. Embodiment eats. Embodiment eats. Embodiment eat. Ooh. Almost turned into a tongue twister, didn't it? Embodiment eats so that embodiment may function in the apparent appearance of reality. That the I and or me perceived prior to collapsing. So the story of the I and or me that is born into a reality that it perceives will either eventually collapse and become awakened, enlightened, more aware, that their I and or me never really existed. equivalent to Tom Campbell's metaphors of the avatar as embodiment. See, in non-duality circles, or Advaita Vedanta, transcendence is described in similar ways, although using different terminology, different words to describe the same idea, the same concept. The derivations are still clear. And the clarity of the derivations is clearer and immediate and spontaneous. The recognition of all that is a spontaneous acknowledgement that all that is simply is, and everything else outside of that, everything else outside of all that is not knowable. Anything that is outside of all that is can also be construed as nothing. And yet, in nothingness, there is no life. There is no life in the sense that there is the lack of activity. And yet, the lack of activity depends upon what degree of lack are we referring to here. Because there are different degrees of lack, or even loss. But the sense of loss is associated with a separate sense of self, which then has yet to collapse, even partially, their I and or me, which is also associated with their seeker. Because the I and or me has an accompanied partner, which is the seeker. So each representative of all that is has their story, their own unique story, that can be stated or shared with other people that are either still experiencing their story of their I and or me that has yet to collapse. And you can also have those that spontaneously acknowledge and recognize that your I and or me has yet to collapse. Those who are still unawakened or not enlightened, they're unenlightened. It's not that they can't be, or it's not that they're incapable of becoming enlightened. It is that they simply have yet to recognize that all that is simply is everything and nothing simultaneously. The I and or me that has yet to collapse and approach liberation and then experience liberation that I and or me that has yet to collapse does not seemingly want to let go of those feelings of need and want and the habits of being right or wrong and those habits of perception that are dual in nature. Habits of perception that are dual in nature in such a way that the duality of their life, the story of the I and or me eventually does one of two things in that duality. It either brings the person to that person that the individual that is supported by their partner, which is the seeker, to perpetuate that their ego or persona or separation of self, the sense of a separation of self, that by all means, by every means possible, the seeker needs to continue seeking for ways to justify and support the very existence of an I and or me, that they're an individual that matters. That matters in the sense that there is duality, there is comparison, distinction. The I and or me that has yet to collapse will perceive reality and their very existence in that way, in that manner, in that sense. That the seeker will say, I have found the information you need to support that you matter. And here it is. And it could be several, well, innumerable ways that the seeker supports the I and or me, so that it prevents what from happening? It prevents the collapse from happening. So there is this sense of a separation of self. Now, separation of self can mean innumerable things as well. Can be explained in one of innumerable ways as well. Now, what the separation of self is, that there is this sense of not being one with all that is. That's what that is. It's as though there's a feeling of loss, and it's that feeling that you're not home, or you're not settled, you're not at peace. You have yet to find some degree of contentment, some type of peace. It doesn't necessarily have to be a feeling of completion or bliss, utter bliss, where there are no longer any how can I put this? There are no longer any desires or motivations of any kind to actually care. To care about what? To care about life. And is that not how one learns about what all that it is really about, it's truly about. It's about unconditional love, it's about completeness, it's about all these things. And yet, all of those sensations, all of those feelings are simultaneously experienced when the separation of self does what? It retracts and comes back to the core essence of what it was all along. That is the connectivity with all that is happening there. When the self has acknowledged and realized that it was being separated by the realities that were collectively and still continuing to be collectively apprehended by the idea of a societal structure. The idea itself of a societal structure is to do what? Well, the basics. Be economically viable in society, in that societal structure. Get some schooling. Attend school, go through the channels of the institutions, the school systems, the public school systems. We can use America and here in the United Kingdom as two main examples. Since of course these are the main English-speaking countries in the world, two of the main ones, America and the United Kingdom. And so the societal structure, the idea of that is to go to school, and then as you're going through school, once you go through those first steps, grades of development, stages, and then you reach college level, and then of course that right there is optional. Then you either go to uni, that's what they call it here in Great Britain, in England, here in the UK. United Kingdom, they call going to college as they just simply say uni. Oh, going to uni. University, short for university, obviously. But either one does that to become economically viable, or they then find a trade or an interest in a skill set that they would like to acquire, or some type of career path that is suggested based on your strengths in academia while you were attending public schools or even a private school, and maybe you excelled in some one of the subjects there, and so a career path guidance counselor at a college perhaps, or even right before you're graduating to high school will suggest such things. But you see, that is all part of the sense of separation of self that becomes mingled in that societal structure in such a way that it becomes lost in a pseudo-reality that is far removed from the self, and the I and or me, I'm the seeker, are having a great time, man. They're really enjoying that. And although they're enjoying that, they do not realize that that is suffering. It's a peculiar thing, the way that is going on in society every single day, day in and day out. Husband comes home, let's just say hypothetically here. Husband comes home and says, "Honey, I'm home." Right? Puts the keys, car keys, on the table. Or in the banister or wherever. "What's for dinner?" "Honey, I'm cooking spaghetti." "Great! Where are the kids?" Son and daughter come downstairs. "Oh, here we are." "Oh, there you go. There you are. Dad's home." And the kids go, "Yay." "How was school?" "Great, Dad," says the son. "What about you, daughter?" "Ah, well. We'll let Mom handle that, yeah?" And the wife says, "Well, how was your day?" "Well, wife, it wasn't too bad, but I got these deadlines that I have to meet at work, and I'm hoping that they work out. Hope it does work out. Trying for that other position that help this family in a lot more ways by bringing in some more cash flow. That way you put it into the college fund for the kids and that kind of thing." So you see, that's just one minuscule way that the I and or me, along with the seeker that supports the I and or me in many ways, in innumerable ways, becomes involved in the sense of a separation of self and continues on until, even after the embodiment is no longer present or witnessed in this reality. So then one would ponder that since it is, in a sense, a form of transcendence, either way, even when there's a collapse of the I and or me, and even when there's a collapse of the seeker, and as liberation happens, and then even after liberation, there is still embodiment, and even after there's embodiment, there is that final stage of transcendence. Now, the stage of transcendence, or the process of transcending, can be described in this way. Well, this representative of all that is would describe it in this way: that the transcendence experienced by the I and or me and seeker that had yet to collapse or did not collapse during an incarnation or during an incarnational period, that the I and or me was experiencing their story. In other words, the ending of a story of an I and or me is not the same type of transcending or transcendence that a liberated one experiences. A liberated one, or awakened or enlightened, a liberated one experiences transcendence differently. There are distinctions and differences. Although the first phases of the detachment from embodiment, because one could say that the experience of suffering happens even after liberation, but not quite as obvious as the degree of suffering that is greater with an I and or me that had yet to collapse and did not collapse throughout the I and or me that had been experiencing their story all the way to the end when they detach from their embodiment. And when they detach from their embodiment, they are still, as it is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, still within the confines of what is referred to as a wheel of Dharma. This wheel of Dharma is a type of abode. It's not exactly a wheel per se, but it is a wheel in the sense that there is cycling happening. There is the process of an I and or me re-entering this type of scenario or this type of reality that is set up in such a way where both types of transcendence are happening. That type of transcendence that is associated with those stories of I's and or me's that never collapsed in one incarnation. And when referring to incarnation, we can say that that would be the interim, or the period of the appearance of embodiment. That's one way to explain this process of transcendence. So let's refer back and summarize before there is an explanation about to be provided here in this video, this presentation that is titled Transcendence. Before providing the distinctions and the differences of how and the manner by which embodiment is detached and is either experiencing that detachment as a liberated one with a witnesser that had yet to collapse and be fully detached from embodiment just prior to absolute liberation and oneness with all that is. So to summarize, there was the story of an I and or me that was born into reality. Then there was a collapse of an I and or me. There was also a seeker that had once supported justifying the existence of an I and or me. Then the seeker collapsed, and then there is liberation. Liberation happens. And yet, then, there is the witnesser. Now it does get a bit interesting here at this point. The witnesser was part of the self that was witnessing the collapse of the I and or me and the collapse of the seeker. And as liberation happened, the witnesser was no longer attached to witnessing the story of the I and or me and the seeker that had yet to collapse. Now, the witnesser is part of liberation that happens. The witnesser is similar to how the seeker was supporting the I and or me, preventing the collapse from happening. And yet now, after liberation has happened, there is a witnesser still. That's not to say that the witnesser was not there whilst the I and or me and the seeker had yet to collapse. The witnesser was simply kind of in the background more, not quite as active yet. Not quite as active as the seeker was to supporting the existence and the presence of the I and or me prior to collapse, or prior to collapsing. Now, this is the process that's going to lead to explaining about transcendence here, or an explanation regarding transcendence. Now, liberation happens. Liberation has happened. Now there is the witnesser. It's not to say the witnesser was born into reality. The witnesser was already there, witnessing reality all along. Regardless of whether or not the I and or me was going to collapse or not, or whether or not the seeker was going to collapse or remain a seeker. And yet, an I and or me and a seeker cannot continue after liberation. There is always a witnesser, even after liberation happens. Then, there is the collapse of the witnesser. But only until there is no longer embodiment. Once there is a detachment of embodiment, then the witnesser collapses and becomes self-realized or self-realization that absolute liberation and oneness with all that is happening. Then there is the absolute and complete reunion with all that is. But that's not to say that there is no degree of union whilst there is still embodiment. There can be. There can still be degrees of association with all that is, even whilst with and attached to embodiment. But that really requires some great extensive activity or types of practices even after liberation. For even though, or although there is embodiment, in order to even approach absolute liberation, whilst still with embodiment, it's just not quite there though, but can be if there is extreme discipline with the embodiment. That would be satsangs every single day. That would be meditative practices constantly. Constantly. That would be practicing some form of bhakti yoga, perhaps, one could say. Very, very strict disciplines with embodiment in order to even approach anything closely resembling to an association with absolute liberation, because embodiment is no longer or never was really associated with absolute liberation. Liberation, although liberation happens once there is a collapse of the I and or me and the collapse of the seeker. And yet, although embodiment continues to happen, even after liberation, the self has yet to become fully self-realized, or self-realization. Has yet to be experienced with the collapse of the witnesser and the detachment of embodiment. The witnesser is simply there as a way to remind all that is that's being represented in that embodiment, that there is still all that is everything and nothing, and its unconditional love is complete and all. So the witnesser is there to remind, to be as a reminder of that, to be as a reminder that all that is everything and nothing, and it is unconditional love. It's perfect. It's perfection. All that is perfection. And the paradox, though, is that not even the witnesser can know that. The witnesser, especially while there is still embodiment, cannot apprehend or even imagine what it must be like to be one with all that is in absolute liberation, without embodiment. That cannot be imagined. It is beyond the witnesser's comprehension. So if it is beyond a witnesser's comprehension, such an idea, the idea of that alone, is so far removed from an I and or me and seeker that has yet to collapse. Imagine the unawakened one, the unawakened ones, the unenlightened, are that far removed from it, which is why this message will sound ridiculous, and it does. It'll sound ridiculous to an unenlightened one. This message will sound like craziness, just absolute insanity. And it would also not make any sense whatsoever to an unawakened, unenlightened I and or me seeker that has yet to collapse. So far removed from liberation, so far removed from comprehending and understanding and recognizing that all that is everything and nothing. But even that alone, in the completeness of that statement about all that is so far removed from one who has yet to recognize and acknowledge and recognize and self-realize that all that is everything and nothing. It's complete, it is whole, it is perfect, it is unconditional love, it is the Alpha and Omega. It is everything and no thing. When you say nothing, you mean no object. There's no objectivity there. But there can be subjectivity. We can refer to subjects about all that is, and we can discuss those. And this is what the witnesser consistently does, whilst there is still embodiment. So the process of transcendence, or the detachment or the death of the embodiment, as it's traditionally understood and known, when embodiment is no longer animated by the life force or the chi or the essence of that embodiment, there is death. Death in the traditional sense is the heart no longer pumping blood to the embodiment. There is no longer blood going into the brain so that the brain operates and functions in such a way to maintain the integrity of embodiment. And when the heart stops beating, and then there is death, there is sometimes a near-death experience happening. Now, the near-death experience seemingly happens as a component of transcendence. For the I and or me that maintain their story all the way up into that point of death or detachment of their embodiment. But the manner by which death happens and transcendence happens for an unenlightened, unawakened one, or a representative of all that is, that did not collapse their I and or me, and did not collapse their seeker, and therefore did not experience liberation, and then activated, in a sense, put the witnesser into the forefront of that process of transcendence. Then that I and or me that was once still unenlightened or unawakened and did not collapse in that incarnation, and with that embodiment, there is the wheel of Dharma that brings that I and or me back into the fold. And that fold is that process by which an I and or me is born into reality. Now, that is the beginning of the story for an I and or me and the seeker. That's the beginning of every story, of every I and or me that has ever been present on this planet and will continue to do so for eternity. That process of transcendence may continue to happen forever. It will only seem to happen forever if that I and or me and seeker continue in the same manner without ever experiencing liberation. That's not to say they will ever. That entity or that representative that is provided all of these innumerable ways that life can be experienced in a reality, in this type of reality. So opportunities are always there to do what? Well, to awaken, to become enlightened, to recognize that all that is, and that the oneness is becoming one. And what all that is doing, through all these embodiments and through all these I's and me's and all the collapsing that's going on throughout the universe. But we will refer to the earth because this is a familiar abode. And the familiarity is there in such a way that all the I's and me's, all the seekers, all the liberated ones, all the witnessers, and even those that have reached absolute liberation and oneness with all that is, and are present without embodiment. See, they're present. They're around us right now. They're just not taking on embodiment. In other words, they're closer to absolute liberation than the liberated one. The liberated one has yet to acquire, or not necessarily acquire, but experience. To experience what absolute liberation is all about. And so here is another paradox, though. As this representative of all that is speaking because of embodiment, and is still present or seemingly present in this reality, but no longer expressing or no longer justifying that there's an I or me, because that story ended. The story of the I or me and the seeker, the story of the me and the seeker, once it has collapsed, it is no longer relevant. It's no longer relevant at all, because liberation happens. And when liberation happens, everything that's associated with an I and or me and seeker is irrelevant. And the importance shifts towards the witnesser that prepares that liberated one, whilst they are still in embodiment, to do what? To prepare for absolute liberation and detach from embodiment. That is transcendence. So there are those two types of transcendence processes that are in place. They're in place for the unenlightened, unawakened one, the non-collapse of an I and or me, and a non-collapse of a seeker. And then there was the explanation provided about the witnesser. The witnesser can be construed as that still small voice within the I and or me, and the seeker knows this. The seeker knows who the witnesser is, but will not divulge that to the I and or me that has yet to collapse. Because if the seeker divulges and informs the I and or me that there is a witnesser, that still small voice, that's saying, hey, your life doesn't really matter. You, as an egoic you and with your ego and your egoic nature, you with your fears, you that is the me that is fearful, or the me that has beliefs, that operates on full-blown duality, that this has to be either right or this has to be either wrong. Man, there is great suffering in all that. There really is. Oh my. There is just so much needless suffering that is noticed a lot more obvious. It's a lot more obvious after liberation. That all that suffering is still going on because one that is liberated can still recall what it felt like, or the experience of being involved in supporting the I and or me before it collapsed. Now, although even after liberation there's no longer the support of an I and or me, that you matter more than anyone else, that the me matters more than anyone else, or the seeker is still there helping the me, with that contraction or of that sense of separation. The suffering is more obvious then, because especially if the collapse of that I and or me and seeker is still kind of, let's say, new in a sense where you're restoring the restoration of your true self, your core self, which is and always was that witnesser that was innocent, the still small voice that was telling you you're all that is, with everything that's perceivable, everything that you experience in embodiment and out of embodiment. And yet, just notice all these opportunities, and then something else happens. Once you're liberated, then you realize the self becomes more self-realized to appreciate life even more than ever before, so much more than the me that was still non-classed, that had yet to be classed, and had yet to become liberated. Isn't that something? So what more can we do as liberated ones for those among us who are still suffering with their eyes and their me's and their seekers, gluttons for punishment but still, your heart has to go out to them. When I say your heart, your compassion, and you feel kind of a sense of pity, really, and you want to reach out and help them and say, look, you need to drop your ego, you need to drop your fears, you need to drop your beliefs. Now, Dr. Thomas Campbell in his trilogy is My Big Toe, his big theory of everything. His work in there is embedded these same teachings of Advaita Vedanta, and the manner by which a liberated one explains these processes of transcendence and awakenings using non-duality as an example. Tom Campbell uses his big theory of everything in a similar way because he has merged the sciences with metaphysics. And by merging them, there is a similar way of looking at the bigger picture from not only the inside out, from the self outward, but also from the outside in, simultaneously. When I say outside in, outside of embodiment, experiences are constantly happening. Experiences are happening that the witnesser will convey and report back to the liberated one that absolute liberation is accessible, and to prepare. There is not necessarily preparation involved before there is absolute liberation and prior to detachment from embodiment or death, the death process. Perhaps a liberated one could then say that the suffering would be less strenuous to a liberated one. A liberated one that has dropped fears, ego, and beliefs. Fears, ego, and beliefs, and the larger consciousness system that Dr. Thomas Campbell describes, or uses that phrase, larger conscious system, is the same as the all that is. All that is the larger conscious system. The larger conscious system is all that is. Then there is consciousness. Consciousness is that witnesser. That witnesser is conscious. It's awareness. It's aware about absolute liberation, even while there is still embodiment and after liberation. So the process of transcendence, to summarize, without breaking it all down as I did earlier, is this. There was the story of an I and or me that was born into reality. Then there was a collapse of the I and or me. There was also a seeker that once supported justifying the existence of an I and a me. Then the seeker collapsed. There is liberation. Liberation happens. Now there is the witnesser. There is always the witnesser, even after liberation happens. And there is a witnesser of liberation happening because there is embodiment. Embodiment happens even after liberation. Then there is the collapse of the witnesser. Once there is no longer embodiment. And that is absolute liberation and oneness with all that is. Thank you all for your time. Namaste.